Hi, everybody. Welcome to Sermon Shorts. In these talks that I'm doing right now, I want to focus in on what we call the 7 deadly sins. And I think about, actually, there are sort of 2 key verses that come to my mind. One is found in Genesis at the very beginning of the Bible, where it talks about Satan, where God is talking to actually Cain, and he's saying, listen, he says, look, sin is crouching at the door, eager to control you. And this is just before Cain was going to murder his brother Abel. And then I want to, also in your imagination, then go to the end of the Bible, where in Revelations we read that Jesus is standing at the door and knocking. He says, I want to come in and have fellowship with you. And that's found in Revelation 3:20. The whole idea that I think we have to wrestle with as we think about the 7 deadly sins is that we really always have a choice in front of us. On one hand, we always have sin knocking on the door of our hearts, and it's wanting to overtake us. And at the same time, our Christian faith tells us that Jesus stands at our door and knocks as well. Now, sin crouches and Jesus stands, and that should tell us something about the one that we should allow in. And so today, I want us to look at the deadly sin of pride and think about how that knocks on the door of our heart, and then think about the way of Jesus if he comes in. What's the counter virtue to that vice? Now, as we think about all this, about this idea of pride, let me ask you this question, see if you can answer it. It's a famous story, right? Bedtime story I heard being read, and it was turned into a famous movie by Walt Disney. See if you can finish this line. Mirror, mirror. Did you finish it? Right. So it's mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all? It's interesting, right, in this question, it isn't just that the wicked queen is asking about, am I beautiful, which would have been a vanity question, I guess. But no, it was more important for her that she was fairer, more beautiful than anyone else. And actually, we've just begun to get a good definition of what pride is. Pride is not just about being richer or cleverer or beautiful. It is about being more clever, more beautiful, or having more riches than everyone else. It's all about rising up above everyone else. It's all about becoming the center of your world. You know, the Bible gives us some warnings about pride. I mean, it's easy. You could Google these, or if you have a Bible app, you can just type in pride and see numerous passages. The ones that come to my mind are some classic ones. Proverbs 16, it says, pride goes before destruction and haughtiness before a fall. In Isaiah, we read, human pride will be brought down and human arrogance will be humbled. Only the Lord will be exalted on that day of judgment. Of course, that makes me mindful of the passage in Philippians 2 where it says when, at one day, every knee will bow and acknowledge that Jesus is Lord. And anyone who's too proud to acknowledge who Jesus is, well, that day, that will be done. Of course, we also are reminded that the counter to pride, of course, is humility. In 1 Peter 5, we read, and all of you dress yourselves in humility as you relate to one another. For God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. It's interesting, right, that often one of the sins that we really can't stand in other people is pride. I mean, we may look at other sins they do. They may be greedy, they may be gluttonous, they may even be lustful, and we see the brokenness of that. But there's something about when someone is filled with pride, where they walk in and where they are looking down on you, they're snubbing you, they're dismissing you, that it wells up within us a great sense of judgment. What's ironic, of course, too, is if we were all to sort of make a list of the things that we struggle with, what are our sins, so to speak, in our closet? We may say, we struggle with greed, we struggle with anger, we struggle with sloth, we struggle with lust, we struggle with those elements in our life. But often it's really hard for us just to come out and say, you know what, I'm a really proudful person. I don't like people telling me what they do because I think I'm better than most people. That's a hard thing to truly admit. And so we can be so blind to it. I just want to take a quick couple observations with you about this deadly sin of pride. Like, what makes it so deadly for our souls that can lead to our ruination? I think, first of all, we have to remember that pride is always competitive. It creates enmity and hostility between people. Because, again, it's all about me having to be better than you. And if I have to be better or even beat you at something because of my pride, that means I can't be your friend. You have become my adversary, and even worse, my enemy. Pride also makes us unteachable because it means that I have to say, I don't know, and will you teach me? Which I have to be in a posture of humility to learn. But pride doesn't allow me to do that. And so I will go ahead and do my own thing and figure things out, even though people are walking by, watching me do something, saying, well, if he would just ask for some help, he might be able to do this a whole lot easier. But pride makes us unteachable, and we miss out on so many opportunities. Far more dangerous than all that, of course, is pride stops us from knowing God. Let's not forget that what really created Satan himself was pride. He wanted to vaunt himself, above all in God's creation. I think about what C.S. Lewis says in Mere Christianity as he writes in his chapter 8 on pride. He says, in God you come up against something which is in every respect is immeasurably superior to yourself. And unless you know God as that, and therefore know yourself as nothing in comparison, you do not know God at all. As long as you are proud, you cannot know God. Because as a proud person, you're always looking down on others, and you don't have time to look up and see someone who is far greater than you. The other dangerous thing about pride is this. It can help us to really be moral and religious. Think about that. Pride can let us be very moral and very religious. Why? Because we can say, well, I'm not going to give in to anger or into greed or into lust because that's below me, because I'm better than that. And in that moment, I'm using my pride to subject the other vices, the other sins in my life. And so I can come across as though I'm a very put together person. And yet at the very center of my heart now is pride. And that is a spiritual cancer that stops us from loving, stops us from contentment, stops us from even our common sense. As we think about this, of course, Jesus knocks now at our door. Remember we said pride knocks at our door. Well, Jesus knocks at our door. And because of that, when Jesus comes in, he shows us one thing. He shows us that the life in God is one of humility. Let me just give you a quick snapshot images of that. When Jesus was born, he wasn't born in a palace. He was born in a manger, in a feeding trough. When Jesus entered into Jerusalem, he did not ride on a horse representing power and war. Rather, he rode in on a donkey representing peace and humility. And of course, Jesus died on the cross. If anything shows a humility and a servant attitude, the Son of God was willing to subject himself to that. But again, that's the way of humility. And so if we're going to follow Christ, Christ sits at our table after we let him into our heart, so to speak, and says, learn from me and learn the way of humility, which means we can finally stop pretending. We can stop prancing about, trying to put on a false image. We can stop stretching the truth in order to impress people. We can even stop humble bragging. I'm so humbled that I was nominated for, and then fill in the rest of the sentence. The point is that Jesus shows us humility where we humble ourselves. And what we mean by humility ultimately is this. We don't think less of ourselves. Rather, we just think less about ourselves. And I think that's where we get in trouble. We think I got to really think how bad and horrible I am. Well, no, it's just that we need to stop thinking about ourselves so much. So here I want to end on this one idea. What's one way can you, in a sense, keep pride outside of the door of your heart and allow humility to really shape your character? Because here we're really ultimately talking, as we wrestle with the 7 deadly sins, ultimately what we're really talking about is spiritual formation of our souls. And so let me just suggest to you one very simple practice: silence. And what I mean by that is, rather than always having a conversation in your head about yourself, or whether always having a conversation with others about how much you know and how much you need to instruct everybody else, you listen. You get quiet. You aren't always the one to finish the argument. You don't always have to have the last word. You actually take time where you're more interested in learning and hearing from others and hearing their story, and then leave it at that. Practicing that kind of silence actually is a great outward discipline to deal with the pride that is in our heart. Now, there's so many other practices, things you can think about, but today, as we think about what's knocking on the door of our heart, remember, we have to deal with pride. Well, take a look at the questions that are to follow, and I hope this is a good time of spiritual formation for you.